Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mailin' It, the official podcast of the United States Postal Service. I'm your co-host, Dale Parsan.
And I'm Yasmine DiGiulio. This episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. Okay, a lot different. Instead of having a guest, Dale and I are going to answer some of the biggest questions that we get about the Postal Service and about the podcast itself.
That's right, Yasmine. I think the best place to start is at the beginning. Not the beginning of the podcast, I mean the beginning of the Postal Service itself. Yasmine, if I asked you when the Postal Service was created and why, what would you say?
Oh, a quiz. I like that. I would say the short answer to when is 1775. Some of our listeners may remember this from one of our earlier podcast episodes. The longer answer, as we all know, it comes from the British. The British started a postal system in the American colonies. A lot of people didn't use it, but it was really important to newspaper printers like Benjamin Franklin, who served as a postmaster under the British. As part of the Second Continental Congress in May 1775, the U.S. launched its own postal service, with Benjamin Franklin as its first postmaster general. The Post Office Department, as the Postal Service was known back then, was formally created in 1792.
You know, it's interesting that the Postal Service is actually older than the United States itself. And how about the why?
Well, the why comes down to a few important reasons. Our founding fathers knew that a postal service was really important for a democracy, and the country was otherwise pretty unconnected. During the war, the new U.S. government needed the Postal Service to send messages between Congress and the military. And then, after the war, the Postal Service continued and served as America's first communications network. Now, I've got a question for you. Dale, where does the Postal Service get the money it uses to run the business? Is it funded by U.S. taxpayers through Congress?
That's an excellent question, and one that I get pretty common in my everyday life. No, the Postal Service is not funded directly by taxes. The Postal Service relies on sale of postage, products, and services to pay for its operations. Another important question, one of the most common questions the Postal Service gets from its customers, where's my package?
That is an important question, and it's something I've often wondered myself while I'm waiting for something to arrive. There are a few different ways someone can track their package through the Postal Service. You can start by going to USPS.com and entering the package's tracking number, if you have it. That will give you information about whether the package is still in transit or whether delivery was attempted. Sometimes a carrier can't access the mailbox because it's blocked or they can't get to it for some other reason. In those cases, the mail goes back to the local post office to be delivered the next day. You can also schedule a redelivery through the USPS site. Another option is to sign up for our free Informed Delivery service. Informed Delivery emails you a notification every day that lets you preview your mail and track any incoming packages. We actually have a great earlier podcast episode that goes into how Informed Delivery works and some of the features it offers. It's also important for people to know that if a package is coming from overseas, the U.S. Postal Service doesn't have any visibility into when we'll receive that package from the country of origin. And then, once we do receive that package, you can track it using our website or Informed Delivery, the same tools we've already mentioned.
What happens if a piece of mail or a package is missing and no one can find it?
If all else fails and we can't find the package, either the sender or the intended recipient can file a claim for lost or damaged mail that's been insured. If you visit USPS.com/help/claims.htm, our website provides instructions for filing a claim. Here's another question we're asked a lot. Do workers at the Postal Service have their own union?
The answer is yes. In fact, there are a few unions covering the majority of our career employees. These include the National Association of Letter Carriers, or NALC for short, the National Rural Letter Carriers Association, NRLCA, the American Postal Workers Union, APWU, and the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, NPMHU. My next questions are two more of those nut and bolt questions that people ask. How do I hold my mail if I'm going on travel? And how do I change my address with the Postal Service?
Both of those can be done through the Postal Service's website. To have your mail held, you can go to USPS.com and click on the Quick Tools link at the top left-hand side of the homepage. The site will either ask you to create a new account with the Postal Service or sign in to an existing account if you have one. From there, the site will take you through the steps to have your mail held at your local post office for up to 30 days. Of course, if you can't get online, you can always go to your local post office and ask the clerk for a form to fill out.
How about change of address?
So that's actually a pretty similar process. You can click on the Quick Tools link from the USPS.com homepage and go to the Change My Address link. From there, you'll have to fill out an online form and enter your credit card information. There is a charge of $1.10 for a change of address submitted online. Your local post office will also have a change of address form you can fill out if you can't get online or if you don't want to pay. They'll verify your identity in person. One thing to note, make sure you only use the official USPS.com website or go in person to fill out a change of address. There are a lot of third-party sites that will charge you a significant fee for the change of address for no reason other than trying to scam you. So Dale, here's a question that's very timely. How can I request free at-home COVID-19 test kits?
That is pretty timely. We're actually going to devote an entire upcoming episode on the topic of how the Postal Service delivered those test kits to hundreds of millions of homes. In the meantime, here's what you should know. Every home in the U.S. is eligible to order free at-home tests. The Postal Service set up a special website where you can order these tests. It's special.usps.com/test kits. When you get to the site, fill out the form with your contact info and shipping address. Once you make the order, the Postal Service will send you updates so you can track your order. Here's another one for you, Yasmine. Does a person have to take an exam to work for the Postal Service?
Ooh, that is a good question. So you do have to take an exam for a lot of our positions. And there are lots of different tests for the different positions, including mail carrier, mail handler, mail processing clerk, or a sales, service, and distribution associate. The tests are used to determine things like a job candidate's general aptitude and how they might handle different scenarios they would encounter on the job. I actually had to take a writing test when I applied for my first job at USPS headquarters in the Government Relations Correspondence Group. All right, my turn. Dale, do you know how stamps are chosen?
Well, we had a previous podcast episode on this topic with the Director of Stamp Services. The Postal Service relies on the public to make stamp suggestions. We get tens of thousands of ideas mailed to headquarters each year. The Citizens Stamp Advisory Committee reviews those proposals and makes recommendations to the Postmaster General, who has the ultimate say. That committee was established in 1957. Members are appointed by the Postmaster General, and the committee usually consists of members with collective expertise in history, science, technology, art, education, sports, and other areas of public interest. They make their recommendations keeping in mind both postal customers and stamp collectors. Recommendations go to the PMG for final approval. My favorite stamp is actually one that I mentioned during that episode with the director, and it has to do with the stamp that commemorates the annual Hindu festival and holiday, Diwali.
I would say my most recent favorite are the frozen treat stamps that came out a few years ago. They had a fun scratch and sniff feature that I would love to see on future stamps.
Here's one related to that. What makes some stamps so valuable to collectors?
Typically, the value of a stamp is determined by 4 characteristics: the image on the face, the perforations along the edge where it was attached to its sheet, the denomination or monetary value, and the country of origin, which is usually featured on the face of the stamp. The most valuable stamps in the world often feature some kind of mistake or misprint within one of these main components.
Aren't some stamps worth millions of dollars?
You know, I looked that up, and there are quite a few that are worth millions. One of the most valuable rare stamps in the world is worth about $9.5 million. It's known as the British Guiana 1 cent magenta. The original version had been available in large batches in the late 1850s. When a batch of the stamps went missing, Britain produced an emergency run of the stamps, but they were slightly different from the original design. This rarity is what makes them so coveted. At this point, only one of the stamps from that emergency run is known to exist. The 1855 Treskilling yellow stamp is another valuable rarity. It's one of the first stamps that was ever issued in Sweden, and it has a color error. Different sources give it different values, but it's probably worth between $2 to $3 million. Either way, that's a lot of money. Dale, here's another stamp question for you. If I buy some stamps, do they ever expire?
Ooh, I was recently moving and I found a book of stamps, so this is timely. A forever stamp holds its value, quote unquote, forever. It's something that you can continuously use as long as they're valid, in terms they haven't had a cancellation mark by being used to mail something previously. Non-forever stamps, though, they have a certain denomination listed on them. And while they can be used moving forward, the denomination is going to be factored in as to the price for mailing that particular item.
And now one for you, Dale. Can you name some of the most famous people to work for the Postal Service, besides us?
I can name a bunch. Let's break it down by how famous they were. Starting off with politics, Abraham Lincoln was postmaster in New Salem, Illinois from 1833 to 1836. Harry Truman was postmaster in Grandview, Missouri from 1914 to 1915. Switching from politics to entertainment, Walt Disney was a carrier for Chicago, Illinois, and a Christmas worker in Kansas City, Missouri from 1918 to 1919. Actor and comedian Steve Carell was a rural letter carrier in Littleton, Massachusetts in 1985. On to literature, novelist William Faulkner, author of The Sound and the Fury, was postmaster at the University of Mississippi in 1924. And Richard Wright, author of Native Son, was a clerk in Chicago, Illinois from 1929 through 1932. There are a lot more, but I think we'll leave it there for now.
Dale, if someone were interested in joining the Postal Service and working for us, how would they start?
Another timely question. For individuals that are interested in pursuing employment with the Postal Service, it's important that they go to USPS.com and head over to the careers section of the website. There they'll be able to search for any open positions that might be available across the country, and we're even rolling out some videos and some links that'll give you more insight into the day-to-day responsibilities of those positions to get a better feel for if it's something you're interested in pursuing.
Dale, in our mission, we say that we deliver mail and packages 6 days a week throughout the country. But in my neighborhood, I've noticed mail delivery trucks operating on Sunday. What's going on there?
Yasmine, great question. That actually has to do with certain companies paying the Postal Service to deliver on Sundays. It is a value add for the Postal Service and allows everyday customers to have another delivery day throughout the week. Yasmine, a question I get pretty often from my friends is what's that little red flag on the outside of my mailbox all about?
That's a great question, Dale. That flag is there in case you have any outgoing mail that you want your carrier to pick up on their route. By putting the flag up, you're signaling to the carrier that there's mail to be picked up.
Another question that's been coming up pretty frequently has to do with the public receiving text messages or emails that involve postal services, and generally they're scams. They're not actual postal entities that are reaching out to you. What are some ways that the public can protect themselves?
It's a great question, Dale, and I've received quite a few of those text messages myself. It tells you that you have a package coming and gives you a link to click on to check on its status or schedule redelivery, when really it's not coming from the Postal Service at all. If you see something like that makes you suspicious, we definitely encourage you not to click on any links and then to contact the Postal Inspection Service. We had an episode with them in which they highlighted a lot of these scams that are targeting customers of the Postal Service, and they offered some really great tips for protecting yourself. One thing you can do is visit their website at uspis.gov to learn more about the different scams and to report any crimes that you might be a victim of or if you've witnessed.
Before we wrap up this episode, I'm curious, what do you think is the most interesting thing we've learned about the Postal Service since starting the podcast?
Generally, I feel I've learned something new from each of the guests that we've had on our podcast. It's been really interesting to hear from them and learn more about all the different aspects of the Postal Service, from its operations to its history. One thing that really stood out to me was the History of Women episode that we did with Jenny Lynch. It was fascinating to hear how women defied a lot of the social traditions at the time to work for the Postal Service, from things like making their own uniforms or taking on rural carrier routes just to be able to be part of this organization. I found it really inspiring.
And here I was thinking that you were going to mention the Stamp Cave.
I still am fascinated by the Stamp Cave and trying to convince us to go on a visit over there to check it out.
Maybe one day.
What about you, Dale? What has stood out to you from the podcast?
For me, it comes down to some of our episodes around the emerging technology for the organization, for the Postal Service. All the information we've learned around informed delivery and the value it brings to both shippers and recipients of mail and packages, it's really something that can push us into the future, and it excites me.
Let's talk about your podcast experience as a whole. How have you enjoyed this? Have you ever hosted anything like this before?
Oh gosh, not since elementary school when I read the lunch options every morning. No, this has been an amazing opportunity to understand more about our organization, the history of where we've come, and a bit more about where we're trying to go. How about you?
I agree. It has definitely been enlightening in that way. One thing that I really enjoy about hosting the podcast is just the chance to have these creative conversations with people and learn more from them about their experiences and their expertise.
Well, with that, I think we'll call it a wrap on this episode. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe to Mailin' It wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss the next episode. And follow along on Instagram @US Postal Service, Twitter @USPS, and on Facebook.